I turned onto our street at Ravenshore with the sun low enough to turn the fence line into tiny sparks. Maya stood by the curb with her hood up. I almost waved the way I always do when she waits for me. Then I saw the edges of her hair. It was wrong. It was cut into a harsh shape that did not belong to her small head. A thin scatter of hair lay near the steps and caught the light like metal shavings. I braked hard and the coins in the cup holder rattled once. The sound felt too loud for a quiet street. I was out of the car before the engine settled. The air smelled like warm rubber from the slide and a hint of salt from the bay. Maya did not move. She lifted a hand and let it fall again, as if the air were heavy. "Show me," I said. She pushed her hood back. The cut line bit across the back of her head at a bad angle. The skin at the nape was red, where fingers had held her still. A faint mark circled her wrist. It looked like the pale shadow a tight hair tie leaves, but I knew it was not from a hair tie. "Who did this?" I asked. She did not look at me. She looked at the playground. The swings moved without anyone on them. The rule sign at the gate stood clean and white. The rubber floor showed scuffs where kids dragged their feet to stop. She kept her eyes on the bolts of the slide. "Grandma. Lisa." "Grandpa," she said. Her voice was thin and flat and older than she is. Something rose in me and pressed against my ribs. It felt like the sea hitting a wall. My hands wanted to do everything at once. "Hold her. Fix it. Find them." I took a breath and made my voice calm. "We start the record first," I told her. "We do it step by step." I opened my phone. I took close photos of the cut line. I framed the base rule sign in the background so the place would be clear. I took a photo of the wrist. I turned on the recorder and asked Maya to tell me what happened in her own words. I kept my mouth shut while she spoke. She said they were waiting on the benches by the swings. She said Grandma told her it was time to behave like a good girl. She said Grandpa held her hands because she kept pulling away. She said Aunt Lisa took scissors out of a canvas bag and started cutting. She said some little kids stared and then ran to the other side of the playground. The phone buzzed with a message during her last sentence. I ignored it for now. The timestamp kept counting. When Maya finished, I saved the file and named it in a clean way. EVID01 Audio. I put the photos into another folder and named it EVID02 Stills. My fingers shook a little. I made them stop. I called base security. Habit shaped my tone. Petty Officer 2nd Class Brinley Goodwin. Administrative, Strike Wing. Housing Street 3, near the playground. Minor child. Assault with a simple tool and restraint. Offenders are civilians. They entered as my relatives. The child is safe with me. We need medical and a patrol. The dispatcher changed tone at once. She asked if any offender was still present. I said no. She told me to remain calm and not to attempt contact. A patrol was near. She asked if we wanted medical. I said yes. She asked if the child wanted to leave the scene. I asked Maya. She nodded. I said yes to the move. We walked to our porch. Maya held my sleeve in a small, hard grip. I let her. The message on my phone was from Lisa. "You made her wild. This is how we teach respect. You are welcome." I took a clean screenshot and labeled it EVID03 text. I saved it to the folder and backed it up to the secure drive in the cloud that my unit uses for incidents. Then I also saved it to a thumb drive in my bag because I like copies that I can hold. The patrol car rolled up and stopped by the curb. The officer stepped out with open hands and a steady stance. He did not crowd us. He asked Maya if she wanted a blanket and if the inside of the car would feel better than the porch. She whispered yes to the car. He opened the back door and let her sit while I spoke to him on the sidewalk. He asked for names and access status. I told him my mother's full name is Eleanor, but she goes by Nora. My sister is Lisa. My father is Patrick. I told him I had placed them on the base access list last month because Maya had asked to see them. He wrote that down. He asked if I wanted them removed. I said yes. He said pass an ID would start that today. In the clinic, the physician assistant waited for Maya to give consent before she touched her. She recorded each mark. She spoke each line out loud so the audio would catch it. She asked if Maya felt dizzy. She asked if there had been words that felt bad. Maya said there were words. The assistant wrote down the phrase, "good girl," as a verbal note. She wrote place as housing playground. She wrote time using the clinic wall clock and the intake form. Another officer asked me to hand over any files. I gave him a printed index of what I had so far and told him I would bring sealed copies as soon as I could prepare them for chain of custody. He said good. He told me to call Fleet and Family for intake right away. He had that kind of voice that makes you do the next thing without feeling pushed. I called from the waiting room. The woman who answered said her name was Marisol and that she worked with the Family Advocacy Program. She asked me to bring anything I already had and to keep original files sealed once I made working copies. She asked if Maya would feel safer with a school safety plan. I said yes. She said we would sit down and make one with Maya in the lead. On the walk back to our unit, Maya asked for noodles. The request was so ordinary that it felt like a gift. I said yes and asked butter or sesame. She said both. The corner of her mouth moved up a little, and that was enough to keep my spine straight for the next hour. At home, I placed each file into an envelope and wrote the code on the front: EVID01 audio, EVID02 stills, EVID03 text. I wrote the time and my initials across the flap and sealed it with tape. The sound of the tape was sharp and clean. I set the envelopes in the lockbox next to my uniform blouse. The ribbons on the blouse looked too bright for the room. The swing outside moved again. The tall light post next to the gate had a small metal plate near the base with a string of digits. I did not try to memorize them. I only noticed the plate and the way the numbers caught the sun. It felt like a detail that would matter later. The kind of detail that sits in the corner of a photograph and turns out to be the anchor for the whole story. I opened the cupboard and took out a pot. I poured water and waited. The slow build to a boil was the first quiet thing all day. I leaned my hip against the counter and watched the tiny bubbles gather. Maya sat on the floor with her back to the cabinet and drew a rectangle around a small tower. She was making a lighthouse without the sea. She used the gray pencil and then the yellow. She did not speak. The sound of the water grew and became a soft rush like a calm tide on flat stones. I told her that her hair was hers. I told her that we would make a plan with her as the lead. I told her that when she was ready we would find a mirror and a chair, and we would make choices together. She nodded without looking up. She shaded the top of the lighthouse and left a thin ring of light at the very edge. She made a little door near the base, just where a person could reach it. We ate at the low table with our knees touching. She watched the steam curl and dip. She slurped a noodle and smiled with real teeth for 2 seconds. I felt my lungs open the way they do when I hear a jet lift off. It is a simple thing. It is air moving through a body. It feels like starting again. When she went to brush her teeth, I stepped outside for a minute. The evening had settled over the little park. The swings were still. The rule sign stood where I had framed it in my photo. The new bulb in the light post glowed without flicker. The small plate with the digits looked steady in that glow. I stood there with my hands in my pockets and let the quiet soak into me. I did not ask the quiet for answers. I only let it remind me that the next step would come and then the next. Inside, I wrote a short list on an index card. Call Marisol at 9. Print 2 copies of the medical notes. Prepare a school safety draft. Make working copies of EVID 01 to 03. Seal originals. Label envelopes. Log transfer. The list eased the tight places in my chest. Paper does that for me. It is not that paper saves anyone. It is that paper holds the shape of a promise. Maya came back with mint on her breath and asked if the lamp could stay on a little. I said yes. I set it low and turned it so the light washed the wall in a slow sweep. She lay on her side and watched the light move. It climbed and faded and climbed again. It looked like a beam that kept time. I sat in the chair and let my eyes close for 1 minute. I kept my hand open on my knee so that if she reached for it in the night, it would be there. The last thing I heard before sleep was the small hum of the bulb and a distant engine across the base. It rose to a soft peak and then slid away. I breathed with it. I let it carry the day to the edge of the dark and tip it over. I woke before dawn. For a moment I forgot why my chest already felt tight. Then the memory slid in, clear as the edge of the blinds. Maya slept curled under the thin blanket, the lamp still glowing faint gold. I turned it off and stood at the window. The base was quiet. Somewhere far off, a plane engine warmed like a slow heartbeat. I brewed coffee, careful not to let the mug clink against the counter. I have learned that mornings after shock need soft sounds. The steam rose and smelled like the only normal thing in the room. I opened my notebook and read the list from last night. Call Marisol. Print medical notes. Prepare safety draft. Seeing the words steadied me. Maya padded in wearing her hoodie backward by mistake. I helped her turn it around. She laughed a little and said she dreamed of flying over the playground and painting the whole floor white so no bad memory could stick to it. I told her that dreams can be blueprints. She said, "Maybe tomorrow we paint for real." I said, "Maybe we will." After breakfast, I walked her to the bus stop. The other kids stared a bit, but no one said anything cruel. I stayed until the bus turned the corner. The driver waved. I watched until the yellow faded. At 9 sharp, I called Marisol. She answered on the first ring. Her voice carried that low rhythm of people who have stood in storms before. She said the Family Advocacy Office had confirmed coordination with NCIS. She asked how Maya slept. I told her about the dream. She said that was a healthy sign. She told me to come at 11 to start the official intake. I printed 2 copies of the medical report. The words looked sterile on the page, but I could feel the pulse inside them. Each line was a small shield. I placed 1 copy in the envelope marked for base legal and kept the other in my folder. On the way to the office, the wind picked up from the bay. It smelled like seaweed and fuel. The combination always makes me feel both grounded and alert. I walked past the flight line where jets waited with their noses pointed like arrows. They looked patient and dangerous, the way truth can look when it has not yet moved. Marisol met me in the lobby. She wore the same cardigan, maybe washed, maybe the same one. She offered tea. We sat in a small room with pale walls and a round table. She said we would talk through the safety plan and the counseling options. She asked about Maya's school and whether teachers should know details. I said they should know enough to keep her from surprise contact with relatives. Marisol nodded and wrote a note for the counselor to send a formal notice. She slid another sheet across the table. It was titled Child Safety Plan. It had lines for who may pick up, who may not, what to do if approached, and emergency contacts. Writing our names in those boxes felt like building a fence with paper. I did not like that the fence was necessary, but I liked that it existed. We discussed therapy. Marisol suggested a pediatric trauma specialist on base who used art as part of treatment. I said Maya liked drawing lighthouses. Marisol smiled. She said she believed in symbols. She said people heal through images before they can with words. Before we left, she asked if I wanted to talk privately. I almost said no. Then I thought of how silence grows heavy when you feed it. So I said yes. She asked how I was sleeping. I told her the truth. Badly but better when I hear the engines. She said that made sense. She asked if I had someone to talk to besides her. I said I had a few friends in my unit, but I did not want to make the story their burden. She said sometimes sharing is not a burden. Sometimes it gives shape to what already exists. I wrote that in my notes because it sounded like something a future me would need to remember. When we left the building, the sky had cleared. The wind carried thin clouds out toward the water. Maya looked lighter. She asked if she could visit the community room after school to make her clay lighthouse. I said I would check the hours. She skipped once, testing if her body remembered joy. It did. At home, I sat at my desk and started the official incident timeline. Entry 1, 1,530 hours. Observed minor child at playground with physical alteration to hair. Entry 2, initial statement recorded. Entry 3, base security contacted at 1,538. Entry 4, medical visit at 1,610. Entry 5, family advocacy contact 1730. I kept writing until the day fit inside lines. That is how I rebuild the world, one timestamp at a time. When Maya came back from school, she carried a permission slip for art club. She said the teacher thought her drawings were strong. She said maybe she would design a mural someday. I told her she already had, and pointed to the sketch on the fridge. She rolled her eyes but smiled. We cooked noodles again. Comfort tastes like repetition. I taught her how to watch the bubbles and lower the heat just before the boil climbs. She said it was like catching anger before it spills. I told her that was wisdom older than me. After dinner, we walked to the playground. The new light flickered on. Its glow made the metal plate at the base shine like a small badge. I noted the numbers again without reading them aloud. Maya looked up and said the light seemed brighter than before. I told her maybe because we were looking at it together. She asked if the bad memory would stay there forever. I said memories fade when people repaint them with better ones. She nodded and started to swing. The chains creaked in rhythm. The wind pushed her forward. For a second, her silhouette crossed the lamp beam, a thin shape rising and falling inside the glow. When she slowed down, she said, "I am not afraid of this place anymore." I said, "Good." She said, "Maybe I will bring my friends again when the mural is done." I said they would like that. We walked home in the blue light that comes just before full dark. The path glittered with bits of shell crushed into the concrete. She held my hand but lightly now, the way someone holds onto balance rather than safety. Inside, she went to her room and started drawing again. I cleaned the kitchen and updated the log. At 2100, I sent an email to the NCIS contact, confirming the scheduled interview and attaching the index list. I wrote in clear bullet points, each with the evidence number and brief description. I copied Marisol. When I hit send, the screen showed a small paper airplane icon. It reminded me of folded notes in school. It also reminded me that even messages need wings. I checked the door before bed. The lock clicked firm. The envelope and gloves sat on the shoe rack, untouched. I whispered to them. "Stay unused." Maya called from her room. "Good night, Mom." I said, "Good night, Captain, because that is our little joke." She said, "The lighthouse is almost finished." I said, "Then it will guide me home." She laughed and said, "You are already home." I lay down and let that sentence settle over me. It felt like a warm blanket stretched tight enough to hold the night in place. Outside, the wind touched the fence and made it sing a faint high note. I fell asleep, counting it like the soft pulse of the bass itself. The morning began with the sound of the bass loudspeaker, soft at first, like a throat clearing before a long day. The light over the water was pale and kind. Maya ate cereal slowly, the spoon turning in her hand as if she were still thinking about whether she trusted mornings. I told her the safety plan meeting was today. She asked if there would be snacks. I said maybe granola bars. She smiled, a small real one that made me believe we could walk through this. I put my uniform blouse on even though I was off duty. It was not for show. It was armor. The fabric carried the smell of starch and something metallic that I have never been able to name. When I button it, my heartbeat steadies. Maya watched me tie my hair. She said, "You look like you could fix anything." I said, "We will try." The walk to Fleet and Family was quiet except for gulls. The bay wind smelled of salt and oil from the maintenance pier. Every smell on a base is a memory. Inside, the lobby was cool. Marisol came out from the hallway with her calm face. She gave Maya a small sticker that said Safe Zone Visitor. Maya placed it on her sleeve as if it were a medal. We sat at the round table again. Marisol spread a folder full of forms, but she did not start with questions. She talked about paint colors instead, how her son once painted a wall the same gray as a cloud because he said it felt soft. I realized she was teaching Maya that rooms can be safe before papers are signed. When the paperwork began, it felt like building a ship from paper. Each sheet was a plank. The first form listed who could pick Maya up from school. I wrote only my name and Chief Hollins. He is my immediate supervisor and the only person I trust to stand in my place. The next form was for people denied contact. I wrote 3 names in block letters: Eleanor Quinn, Lisa Quinn, Patrick Quinn. My handwriting was steady. I pressed the pen hard enough that the letters left dents in the copy underneath. Marisol asked if we wanted a base-wide alert restricting visitor passes. I said yes. She filled out a request to pass and ID. Her handwriting was slow and graceful. I watched the pen move and felt a strange gratitude for bureaucracy. Paper trails are the opposite of secrets. When Maya grew restless, Marisol handed her colored pencils. She said, "Draw what safety looks like." Maya drew a rectangle house with a lighthouse behind it. The light beam touched the roof. She wrote the word us at the bottom. Marisol looked at me over the drawing and nodded as if to say this is the right direction. We took a break for lunch at the small cafe near the admin building. Maya picked grilled cheese and tomato soup. The soup was too hot. so she blew on every spoonful. Around us, sailors came and went in a low current of chatter and radio static. No one looked at us twice. And that was the best kind of peace. When we finished, Maya asked if she could walk to the pier before we went home. We stood by the railing and watched the water slap the wood. She leaned forward, fearless. I held the back of her hoodie lightly between my fingers, not to restrain her but to remind both of us we were still linked. She pointed at a buoy with a tiny light on top. "Is that what a lighthouse looks like when it's small?" she asked. I said yes, kind of, she said. "Then it is doing its job even if no one thanks it." The way she said it made something inside my chest unfold. Children carry wisdom they do not know how to name. Back home, the mailbox held 2 envelopes, one from housing, one from the base legal office. Housing confirmed that my relatives' passes were suspended. The legal envelope contained the standard victim information guide, dense, printed in polite language. I read it like a manual for a machine that could protect us if I learned its switches. At 1,400 hours, the NCIS agent, Ethan Daniels, called. His voice had the crisp vowels of someone who writes reports in his head while speaking. He said he wanted to set up a formal statement next week. He asked if I was able to provide a digital copy of all 3 initial evidence files. I told him yes, and that I had already logged them with timestamps. He thanked me and said most people don't do half that on their best day. I said, "Habit of admin rates." He chuckled, the kind of laugh that means respect more than amusement. After the call, I sat down to review my checklist. The words "chain of custody" kept circling in my head. I realized I needed a clean external drive dedicated to this case, separate from any work files. I went to the exchange and bought one, small and silver, about the size of a dog tag. When I got home, I labeled it Case Goodwin 01 and locked it in the metal box with the envelopes. The act felt ceremonial. Maya came in from her room holding her clay lighthouse. The base was uneven, but the tower stood. She said, "It is crooked like people." I said, "That means it is alive." She smiled and asked if we could paint it once it dried. I said yes, tomorrow. She picked gray and yellow again, slate and light, the same colors that seemed to chase us everywhere. Later that evening, the air turned cooler. I opened the window. The sound of jets practicing takeoffs rolled through like thunder that knew its direction. I have loved that sound since I enlisted. It is the sound of precision and risk tied together. Maya said it made her feel safe because it meant grown-ups were awake in the sky. After dinner, we made another list together. She wrote things that make me feel okay on top of a notebook page. She added noodles, drawing, the cat next door, mom's voice, and lighthouses. I added morning coffee, checklists, Maya's laugh, engines, and paper trails. She drew a big circle around everything and wrote, "Keep these?" At bedtime she asked me, "Will Grandma go to jail?" I told her I did not know yet, but the people whose job is truth will find out. She said, "Are you one of those people?" I said, "I try to be," she said. "Then maybe the truth will listen to you." I wished I could promise that. I told her truth works like the tide. Sometimes it goes out before it comes back stronger. She accepted that as if it were scientific fact. When the apartment went quiet, I walked outside. The lamp over the playground glowed steady. The metal plate at its base reflected the beam from my phone when I took a picture of it. The numbers were clear now, 6 digits, and a small manufacturer's code. I logged it in my notes with the time. I did not know if it would matter, but small consistencies have saved more cases than big confessions. Across the street, a neighbor waved from his porch. He asked if Maya was doing better. I said yes. He said he saw maintenance trucks replacing a camera near the park earlier. I felt a flicker of relief. Every new camera is a witness that does not lie. Inside, I washed my hands and wrote one more card for the evidence box. Light post ID number 23394, photo logged 1,900 hours. It felt absurd to document a lamp, yet absurdity is part of justice. The smallest facts make the biggest anchors. By 2200, the base settled. I checked the door again. The envelope and gloves sat ready. The lighthouse on the counter had hardened. When I tapped it lightly, it made a hollow sound like a shell. I placed it beside Maya's drawing. The beam she had painted reached over the house roof. I traced it with my fingertip and whispered, Guide us, little one. Then I turned off the lights except for the kitchen bulb, which I left on as a tiny imitation of that painted glow. I wrote the day's log, closed the notebook, and let sleep come in slow waves, knowing the next step would arrive with morning orders. The next day began before sunrise, with the faint buzz of my phone alarm cutting through the dark. For a moment, I wanted to turn it off and pretend the world could wait. Then I remembered the list on my desk. Paper never forgets, and that is both curse and comfort. I poured coffee and opened the lockbox. The envelopes were still lined in order, untouched. The small drive glinted under the lamp. I checked each label, as if reassurance had to be done by sight, and not just belief. Chain of custody is trust written down. Without it, truth floats away. Maya came out rubbing her eyes. She wore the same gray hoodie but with a bright patch she had sewn herself a little yellow square with waves. She said she wanted to cover the old tear from the day at the playground. I said it looked perfect. She grinned and said, "Then it's armor like yours." At 8, Agent Daniels called. His tone was brisk, polite. He said they were preparing the official transfer of digital evidence to the main NCIS database. He asked if I could come by their temporary office at the edge of the base to hand over sealed copies. I said yes, and wrote it in the logbook. He reminded me not to bring the phone that held the original data standard separation procedure. I already knew, but thanked him anyway. Some rules are not for information, but for rhythm. I dropped Maya off at school and stayed long enough to watch her wave at her teacher. Then I drove to the NCIS office. The building was plain concrete, the kind that hides important work behind ordinary walls. Inside, the air smelled like toner and new carpet. Daniels met me with a small nod. He was tall and lean, sleeves rolled once, a man who believed in order. He took the sealed envelope and the thumb drive, checked my initials against the log, and signed the chain of custody form. The click of his pen was loud. "We'll send this for forensic duplication," he said. "The clip is crucial place. Voices, everything. You did the right thing by keeping it contained." I said I had a copy in the lockbox, labeled and dated. He nodded again. "Good," he said. "The fewer copies in circulation, the cleaner the case." His words were measured, but I could feel the respect under them. Before I left, he handed me a card with a single number. "Call this directly if anything new happens. No switchboard." Driving home, I noticed how the base looked both small and infinite at once. Every building had edges that led to somewhere unseen. I thought of how harm also hides in plain sight, quiet until someone names it. I rolled down the window. The air carried a faint smell of jet fuel. To me, that has always been the scent of movement, of things not staying still. When I parked, the neighbor's cat was on my porch again, tail flicking like a small metronome. Maya calls him Captain. I fed him half a tin of tuna and wrote, "Captain Fed" in the notebook. Partly as a joke, but also because I needed proof that some living thing was still uncomplicated. After lunch, Marisol dropped by. She brought a stack of worksheets for Maya's upcoming sessions with the trauma counselor. "They look simple," she said, "but they help kids draw what happened without using the hard words." She glanced at the clay lighthouse drying on the counter and smiled. "She's already finding her own way." We sat at the table while Maya painted, humming softly. Marisol said the interdisciplinary case team would meet next week to review all findings the Family Advocacy Office, NCIS, Child Protective Services, and Base Legal. She said the process was slow but deliberate, and that it would end with clarity. I asked if clarity meant peace. She said sometimes it just means the fog lifts and you can finally see where the rocks are. When she left, the afternoon sunlight hit the lighthouse on the counter. The paint gleamed, uneven but proud. Maya added one last touch, a tiny gray door. "So people can go inside when the storm starts," she said. I kissed the top of her head. Later that evening, I sat at my desk to update the timeline. Every event had a line. Times, witnesses, receipts, evidence numbers. It was starting to look like a map of who we had become. The structure of it gave me oxygen. It was not about revenge. It was about order reclaiming a house that chaos had broken into. At 1,900 hours, my email pinged, "Base-wide restriction for Eleanor, Lisa, and Patrick Quinn approved." The official wording was dry, but I read it 3 times. It felt like the base itself had drawn a line in the sand for us. I printed the notice and placed it in the front of the binder. Maya was watching a movie on the couch. When I told her, she didn't cheer. She just nodded and whispered, "Good. That means no more surprise visits." She fell asleep before the credits. I carried her to bed, tucked the blanket up to her chin. Her breathing was even. For the first time in days, her fingers were open, not curled tight. I sat for a moment watching her sleep, counting the soft rise and fall of her chest. People think safety is a door you close. It is not. Safety is breath continuing without fear of interruption. I stayed up a while longer. The night outside was clear. The lamp over the playground burned steady. The metal plate at the base caught a faint glint from the moon. I thought of all the witnesses that cannot speak: the lamp, the slide, the rubber floor. But how, together, they hold the shape of what really happened. Truth leaves prints even when people try to scrub them away. Before bed, I sent Marisol one line: "All sealed, all logged, all quiet for now." She replied with a single word: "Good." When I finally lay down, I imagined the lighthouse Maya had built. In my mind, its light rotated slowly, touching each wall, keeping the dark honest. I let it sweep over me until I slept. It started with a sound that was not sound at all, but vibration, the phone buzzing on the counter at 6:30. I was making toast. The butter knife froze in midair when I saw the flood of notifications. My mother's name appeared first. Nora Quinn posted, "Love sometimes needs a firm hand. My granddaughter will thank me when she grows up." Underneath, Lisa's post had the same picture of the playground, cropped so that Maya's face was out of frame but her hair was clearly visible. The caption read, "Discipline is love in action." My throat tightened. They had taken the place where she was hurt and turned it into a sermon. I felt heat rise behind my ears. I told myself not to respond. Words typed in anger become evidence against your own calm. I opened my own account, posted 3 photos, each cropped carefully, each showing no faces. The first was the hair on the ground. The second, the faint red line on Maya's wrist. The third, the rule sign with the base emblem visible in the corner. My caption was one sentence: "The matter is under investigation. The child is safe." Then I closed the app. The silence after that felt thick. It stayed in the room like steam that refused to rise. Maya came out, hair still uneven but clean. She said she wanted oatmeal with honey. I cooked in silence, my hands mechanical. She looked at me and asked, "Are they in trouble?" I said, "People who hurt others are always in trouble. Sometimes the law just takes a while to catch up." At noon, I took her to her therapy session. The waiting room smelled like crayons and coffee. The counselor, Dr. Moreno, met us at the door. Her voice was light but steady. She asked Maya if she wanted to draw first or talk first. Maya said, "Draw first." I sat outside with my notebook, filling in small details from the past 2 days. Dates, hours, license plate of my father's truck, which I remembered in a flash that morning. Every fragment matters when truth is being rebuilt piece by piece. When the session ended, Maya carried a drawing. It was of a giant wave hitting a cliff with a lighthouse on top. The light was not yellow this time. It was silver. Dr. Moreno said that silver meant control to children who used color to organize feelings. I thanked her and tucked the drawing into the folder. We stopped at the small grocery on base for milk and noodles. The woman at the register smiled. "You're Brinley, right? I saw that post. Good for you for standing your ground." Her kindness landed like a bruise. I said thank you and walked out quickly. Recognition has a strange taste when your private life becomes public defense. When we got home, the mailbox had another envelope, this time from NCIS. It was a confirmation notice. Evidence logged and chain of custody verified. I felt a tiny click inside, like a gear locking into place. That evening, I was chopping vegetables when my phone rang again. It was Kara, my neighbor. Her voice was rushed. "I think you need to see this," she said. "What is it?" "My son's camera. You know how he films himself doing tricks on the monkey bars? I found something on it." From that day, the knife slipped against the cutting board and made a dull scrape. "Bring it here," I said. "Don't send it online. Bring it yourself." 10 minutes later, she stood on my porch, breath quick from the short walk. Her boy, Timmy, clutched a small camera. I put on the gloves from the shelf near the door and laid a towel on the table. Kara passed me the device like it was a wounded bird. We connected it to my laptop. The file name was a random string of numbers. I hit play. The camera angle was low, Timmy's point of view. The picture shook as he ran toward the swings. Then it steadied. I saw 3 figures near the slide. My mother in her beige coat, my father holding Maya's shoulders. Lisa crouched behind her. The sound came clear. My mother's voice said, "Hold her steady. She needs to remember this." Maya's voice broke through once, "Stop," and then the snip of scissors. My breath caught. The sound was sharp and clean, like metal biting cloth. The lens swung for a moment, catching the base rule sign in the corner, then lingered on the lamppost. The small metal plate glinted with its 6 digits, the same digits I had written down days ago. The video froze on that reflection before Timmy must have stopped recording. When the clip ended, the room was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Kara's hands were clasped in her lap. She said softly, "I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing," I said. My voice was even, which surprised me. "This is proof. This changes everything." I copied the file onto a new drive, sealed it in an envelope, wrote the date and time, and signed across the tape. I gave Kara a copy of the receipt from my evidence log so she would know the exact transfer record. She nodded, still pale. When she and Timmy left, I sat for a long minute with the envelope in front of me. The air in the room felt electric. I could hear my pulse in my ears. The phrase, "Hold her steady," kept echoing, clear as if my mother were still standing behind me. I called Agent Daniels. He answered on the first ring. "I have a new piece of video evidence," I said. "It confirms intent. You'll want to see it." He told me to bring it the next morning. I sealed the envelope inside a larger one and wrote EVID04. Maya came out from her room, rubbing her eyes. "Are you working again?" she asked. "Just finishing something," I said. She looked at the envelope. "Is that for them?" "It's for us," I said. She nodded and walked over to her lighthouse. She turned it so the little painted beam faced the window. "Then the light can reach it," she said. That night I could not sleep. I kept hearing the scissors in my head, that precise metallic sound. I imagined the clip being played on a government computer tomorrow, in a bright office with serious people taking notes. And I thought, finally, the truth will stand up and speak for itself. The next morning, the base was half awake. Gray light filtered through the blinds. I made coffee but forgot the sugar. Maya was still asleep, her face buried under the blanket. I left a note on the table. "Back soon. Call Chief if you need me." Then I picked up the sealed envelope marked EVID04 and drove to the NCIS field office. The sky was the color of wet metal. Every building looked washed of emotion, the way places do when truth is about to enter them. Inside, Agent Daniels was already waiting. He motioned to a conference room with no windows, only a clock that ticked too loud. I handed him the envelope. He checked the seal and the initials, then broke it cleanly. He slid the drive into a laptop. The video played on a small screen. The sound filled the quiet, my mother's voice, my daughter's cry, the command, "Hold her steady." Daniels didn't speak. He adjusted the volume once, then again. When it ended, he looked at me, not with pity but with a professional gravity that felt like a verdict. "This," he said, "changes the classification. It's no longer domestic or familial discipline. It's deliberate harm on federal property." I nodded. I already knew. He typed a note, time-stamped it, and called someone. His voice stayed calm. "We're elevating to the JAG in the U.S. Attorney's liaison. Substantiated visual evidence. Immediate barment pending." While he spoke, I watched the small reflection of the light post in the video, the one with the 6 digits. It glowed like a witness that had waited for its turn to speak. Daniels ended the call and turned to me. "We'll need you to make a formal supplementary statement today. It can be short, just confirming how you received the file." I told him about Kara and her son, about the towel on my kitchen table, about the gloves, about writing the evidence number. He wrote every word into the system. When I finished, he said quietly, "You handled this better than most trained personnel." I said, "It's easier when you have a child. You don't think, you document." He smiled for half a second, then slid a folder across the table. "This is a copy of the preliminary finding. Keep it sealed for your records." I took it, held it like something fragile. As I left the building, the air outside felt heavier, not colder, just filled with meaning. The truth had a weight now, and it had finally found paper. At home, Maya was on the couch watching cartoons. She asked if everything was okay. I told her we were one step closer to making sure no one could hurt her again. She didn't ask for details. Children have a radar for what not to reopen. Later, Marisol stopped by with a small smile. "We just got the NCIS update," she said. "The video confirmed direct intent. The interagency team meets tomorrow to formalize the charges. You'll be asked to review your victim statement, but it's already solid." She set a brown envelope on the table. Inside were school safety forms, stamped, "Approved." Maya could now walk home with 2 designated friends and no one else. The school counselor had been briefed. I felt an invisible line tighten and then release, like a door finally locking from the inside. Marisol poured herself tea, sat across from me, and looked around. "This place feels calmer," she said. I glanced at the clay lighthouse on the counter. Maya had painted tiny yellow streaks along the beam since yesterday. "She's decided it protects us," I said. "She's right," Marisol said. "Protection is as much belief as protocol." When she left, I opened my laptop. The inbox held a new message from Base Command Legal Division. The subject line, "Interdisciplinary case, substantiated, action pending." I opened it. The letter was formal and exact. Based on collaborative evidence from NCIS, FAP, and CPS, the incident involving minor dependent Maya Goodwin has been determined to be substantiated under DOD 6400.01. A permanent barment request for Eleanor, Lisa, and Patrick Quinn is in process. Case will be referred for prosecutorial review under federal statute. I read it twice. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the release of held air. Maya came in holding a small notebook. She said, "Can I read you something?" "Of course," she read in a careful voice. "Safety means no one decides for you. It means you get to say stop and people listen." "Did you write that?" I asked. "Dr. Moreno said to write what safety feels like," she said. "So I did." I pulled her close. She smelled like crayons and soap. The kind of scent that means everything still works, the world still moves. That night I walked to the playground. The air was cold enough that my breath looked like smoke. The swing chains made soft clicks in the wind. The new lamp shone clear. The digits on the metal plate gleamed silver under the beam. For a second, I imagined the frame of that video, the same lamp, the same ground, but the moment before harm turned into proof. I thought about how a single piece of light can flip a story from shame to justice. I took out my phone and snapped a photo. Not for evidence this time, but for memory. Then I put the phone away and just stood there. I whispered, "We saw you." And that's enough. Back home, Maya was asleep. The lighthouse on the counter still glowed faintly in the nightlight's beam. I touched the top of it. The paint was dry now, solid under my fingers. I thought about how clay hardens after being shaped. Not before. Maybe that's what we were doing, hardening after the shaping, finding form after the storm. The base was quiet again. No alarms, no engines, just steady breathing walls and a tiny ceramic tower keeping watch. For the first time, I felt the strange calm that follows exposure, the peace of things no longer hidden. The official meeting was scheduled for 9 sharp, but I arrived 30 minutes early. Old habits. If you show up before everyone else, you get a few minutes of quiet to prepare your face. I sat in the hallway outside the conference room, listening to the muffled shuffle of papers inside. The name on the door read, "Interdisciplinary Case Review." When the clerk called my name, I entered a room filled with uniforms and civilian suits. A long table, a small American flag in the corner, and the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on a burner. Agent Daniels sat on the left. Marisol was there too, with her neat folder of colored tabs. A woman from Child Protective Services introduced herself as Alvarez. Her hands were calm, her eyes the kind that catalog pain for a living without ever letting it stick to her. The chair at the head of the table gestured for me to sit. "Petty Officer Goodwin, thank you for coming. This is an internal review to verify the chain of custody, victim safety, and investigative status. You'll only need to answer a few clarifying questions. The first was about the clip, the one that had changed everything. I described again how it came to me, how I handled it, how I sealed and labeled it. Daniels confirmed the timestamps matched. Alvarez nodded, making small notes. Then came the question I had expected but dreaded. Do you foresee further attempts of contact from the perpetrators? I wanted to say no. But truth has to stay clean once you start washing it. Yes, I said. They've used social media to distort what happened. They might try again through friends or posts. The chair nodded. We'll include that in the protective measures. Marisol slid a paper forward, the updated safety plan. School, housing, workplace. All marked active in green ink. The word active felt like breath itself. When they dismissed me, I stepped into the hallway and felt lighter. The air was the same, but my body was not carrying the invisible proof anymore. It had been passed on, multiplied by witnesses and signatures. That's how healing starts in a system like ours. Not in hugs, but in paper trails that no one can erase. By noon, Maya and I were at Dr. Moreno's office. She was working on a new exercise called Boundaries in Color. The therapist laid out a large sheet of paper and asked her to draw a circle that represented herself. Inside it, she could draw anything she wanted to keep close. Outside, anything that needed distance. Maya drew a small gray circle for herself, then added a lighthouse in the center. Around it, she painted a ring of yellow, then beyond that, a thicker line of slate. Outside the ring, she drew 3 red figures, each with a single X. She looked at Dr. Moreno and said, "These stay out." I had to look away for a second. When the session ended, Dr. Moreno said to me quietly, "She's moving from fear to definition. That's good. Boundaries are a sign of control returning." We stopped at the community room after. The mural on the wall was half finished now, hundreds of small squares painted by kids. Dogs, stars, flowers. I found Maya's square near the bottom edge. Her lighthouse, gray and gold, a tiny door near the base. Someone had written next to it in childlike letters, "You're safe here now." The maintenance crew was working at the playground, replacing the old sand with new rubber tiles. The air smelled of fresh material. For the first time, the place looked clean, not because it had forgotten, but because people had decided it should. A sailor from the maintenance team recognized me and nodded. "Glad they're doing right by you," he said. "We fixed the camera too. That corner has full coverage now." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Sometimes repair is just that simple, people showing up with tools. Maya ran ahead to test the new swing seats. They creaked less than before. She pumped her legs until her sneakers pointed at the sky. The light from the new lamp stretched her shadow long and thin across the ground. Watching her, I thought, this is what proof is for. So a child can swing without looking over her shoulder. That evening, back home, I cooked noodles again, Maya's choice. She stirred the pot and said, "It smells like normal now." I smiled. Normal is the quietest miracle in the world. After dinner, I opened my laptop. There was an email from Ella T. Mercer at JAG. Subject line: Victim Rights Orientation Packet. It listed the next steps: formal charges to be filed, pre-trial hearing scheduled within 60 days, protective orders to be renewed automatically. The bureaucratic language felt cold, but beneath it I could feel a steady pulse, the machine of justice finally moving forward. I printed the packet, hole-punched it, and added it to the binder behind a tab marked Progress. The binder had grown thick, dozens of pages, each one a fragment of how truth is made visible. I touched the spine. It felt like armor. Maya came to my desk holding her clay lighthouse. She said, "I think it's finished." She had painted the roof silver and added one thin white line up the side, like a scar. "The light shines better because of the crack," she said. I wanted to tell her that adults spend years learning what she already understood. Instead, I just nodded. We placed it on the shelf beside my service photo, under the small frame that held my oath of enlistment. It looked right there, like a private promise beside a public one. The night settled slow. I checked the door, the window locks, the list by the phone. The envelope and gloves stayed in their place, untouched. I wrote a new line in the notebook. "Playground restored, case verified," Maya laughing. Sometimes that's enough for a day's victory. When I finally turned out the light, the moon cut across the ceiling in a silver stripe. It looked exactly like the line on the lighthouse. I smiled at the thought that maybe the world copies the brave, not the other way around. The next morning, the base felt sharper, like a ship after inspection. People moved with purpose. Even the gulls looked serious. I walked Maya to the bus stop and stood with her until the doors folded shut. When the bus turned the corner, she pressed her palm to the window for 1 second. I pressed mine to the air. Small rituals are anchors. Back home, I brewed coffee and opened the binder. I made a new tab called Court. Inside it, I slipped the orientation packet from JAG, the notice of barment in process, and my timeline printed clean. I checked the chain of custody log again. The numbers ran straight down the page like a backbone. I have never loved a list so much. At 10, the doorbell rang. I glanced at the shoe rack first. The gloves and envelope sat ready. It was not a habit anymore. It was muscle memory. Through the peephole, I saw Agent Daniels and a woman in a suit with a visitor badge. I set the small recorder on the entry table and opened the door. The woman introduced herself as Assistant United States Attorney Porter. Her voice was precise, the kind that keeps people inside their lane without saying so. She asked if we could sit at the table. She placed a slender folder in front of her and did not touch it yet. "We have enough to move forward," she said. "I want to make sure you understand the road from here. There will be attempts to reframe. They will use phrases like family disagreement or cultural values. We will keep the lane on conduct at a federal installation. Clean, narrow, provable." I felt a strange gratitude for the word provable. It is the most honest word in court. Not what a heart knows, what a jury can hold. Porter asked me to describe, in one paragraph, what I wanted from the process. I looked at the lighthouse on the shelf, then back at her. "I want a clear record that this was harm," I said. "I want the people who did it kept away from my child. I want the system to teach them what respect means." She nodded and wrote 3 short lines. She did not translate my answer into legal jargon. She wrote it the way I said it. Later, I would realize that this is how trust begins with lawyers. They keep your words whole. When they left, I walked to the playground. The air smelled faintly of new rubber and cut grass. A maintenance worker was tightening a bolt at the base of the slide. He wiped his hands and gave me a brief smile. On the light post, the metal plate gleamed. I took another photo for my own sense of continuity and logged the time. The camera at the corner of the park now had a tiny red indicator. Watching. Recording. Not judging. Machines can be kind without trying. At lunch, Chief Holland called. He asked if I needed anything from the shop. Paper, toner, coffee. I told him I was fine. He said, "Your desk drawer is being babysat," which is his way of saying no one is snooping. He told me the XO had used our case in a brief on family safety. He said the room was very quiet. Respect quiet. The kind that learns. In the afternoon, I met with the school counselor. Her office had a shelf of small plastic figures and a sand tray for story play. She showed me the safety plan with signatures from staff. Dismissal would happen through the side gate with a monitor. Substitutes would have the list on file. She asked how Maya was sleeping. I said better with the lamp turned toward the wall so the light sweeps like a beam. The counselor smiled and said, "Patterns help brains calm down." I liked that sentence and wrote it in my notebook. On the way home, I ran into Kara. She kept her voice low. Word had spread that the base had tightened visitor rules around our street. Some people were pleased. Some thought it felt heavy. I told her I understood both feelings. Order always weighs more when it lands near your door. She touched my arm and said she had told her son he had done something brave. He had shrugged and asked for pizza. Children have the right idea about rewards. Evening came gentle. Maya painted the lighthouse door a little darker so it looked used. She said doorways should look touched. We ate noodles and steamed greens. We played a card game where you have to name 5 things you can see. Maya listed chair, window, pencil, bowl, and safe. I said safe is not a thing you can see. She said today I can. I let her win. After dishes, I stepped outside with the trash. A car rolled by slow, then kept going. The hair on my arms lifted. I told myself not to borrow fear from shadows. Still, I stood a minute longer by the porch, watching the way the lamp carved light along the sidewalk. The numbers on the metal plate flashed and went dull as a cloud crossed the moon. I went back in and locked the door. The envelope and gloves caught my eye again. I checked that the flap was open. Ridiculous, but I checked. Maya took a shower and came out in a big t-shirt that used to be mine. She set her sketchbook on the table. The new drawing showed the lighthouse with a thin crack down one side. The beam was brighter because of it. She said, "Dr. Moreno told me light can slip through cracks. I think that is true for people." We curled up on the couch and watched a cooking show. The host burned a sauce and laughed at herself. We laughed too. That laugh felt like the room stretching. When Maya fell asleep, I opened my laptop to finish a memo for Lieutenant Mercer. I summarized the morning visit and the language the prosecutor used. I wrote it calmly, without adjectives. I learned long ago that the first draft of anger is a poem, and the final version of help is a list. Before bed, I walked the rooms. Window latches down, back door locked, front door secure. I set the phone to ring loud for 2 numbers only, Maya's school and the NCIS line on the card. I placed the card face up next to the small lamp. The lighthouse on the shelf caught the bulb and threw a slim band of light across the wall. The band rested for a second on the framed oath. It looked like a finger underlining a promise. I turned off the lamp and let the room go blue. The base was quiet. I could almost feel engines sleeping. I lay down and waited for my breathing to match the tempo of the night. Thoughts came and went. How people pick sides without saying so. How neighbors bring over soup without posting about it. How rules can protect when used as shields and not as sticks. Somewhere outside, a car door closed. Not near. Just part of the world doing what it does. I felt my shoulders drop. I told myself the sentence that has become my prayer. We did the next right thing today. I slept. In the early morning, I woke to the soft knock of rain against the window. For a moment, I thought of my mother's kitchen and the way the kettle used to sing. The thought arrived, and then I let it leave. I went to the kitchen and turned the lamp so it faced the wall. A band of light swept once across the room. It made me think of a patrol. It made me think of a promise kept. Soon we would enter hearings and appointments and the slow machinery of court. Soon there would be words like motion and exhibit and sustain. Tonight there was only a small ceramic tower, a child breathing evenly in the next room, and the quiet knowledge that repair is not the same as forgetting. Repair is work. Repair is a choice. Repair is a base light that was broken and is now bright, and a metal plate whose numbers will be the same tomorrow as they were today. I checked the door one last time. The envelope and gloves looked almost foolish in their patience. I whispered to them, hoping I would never need them. Then I smiled at my own superstition. I turned off the kitchen light and let the lighthouse beam be enough. When the call came, I was alphabetizing supply forms at my kitchen table. The voice on the line introduced herself as Captain Hughes from Base Legal. Her tone was formal but not cold. Petty Officer Goodwin, the interdisciplinary findings are now certified. You'll receive the written decision by courier this afternoon. We're moving to pre-trial scheduling. You'll also be asked to present your timeline for our leadership training seminar next week. The command wants to turn your documentation process into a model. I wrote the date and time in my notebook before the weight of her words could scatter. I knew what it meant. The story was no longer just mine and Maya's. It had become an example, a case study, a warning. The courier arrived an hour later. Inside the envelope was a 6-page report stamped in blue ink. Finding substantiated. The summary read, Incident of assault and emotional abuse of minor dependent within federal installation perimeter. Intent demonstrated. Barment permanent. Federal prosecution recommended. It was sterile and perfect. I felt tears anyway. Every mark on the page was a breath I hadn't taken since the night it happened. That evening, Chief Holland called from the hangar. XO wants you to present your incident timeline at the safety stand-down briefing next Friday, he said. Keep the personal parts minimal. Focus on the procedure. Show how fast coordination worked when done right. My throat tightened. You want me to teach my own story? He hesitated. I know it's raw. But you did every step by the book, and people can learn from that. You decide how much heart to include. After the call, I stared at my binder. It was thick now, edges curling from use. The word progress on the tab looked almost ironic. I thought of the moment I took those first photos, of Maya's wrist, of the light pole, and realized those tiny acts of control had grown into a textbook, survival disguised as protocol. I spent the next day shaping the presentation. Slide 1. Timeline of events. Slide 2. Chain of custody flowchart. Slide 3. Support Network Security Desk, FAP, NCIS, CPS. Slide 4. Emotional aftermath summarized in one neutral bullet. Family member received therapy referral. That was my way of saying my daughter and I are learning to breathe again without breaking the uniform code of tone. Marisol reviewed the draft and smiled. "It's clear, concise, and safe," she said. "But if you want them to understand why documentation matters, end with something human. Just one sentence." I asked. "Like what?" she said. "Something true that doesn't bleed." I wrote, "Documentation is a form of compassion when memory wants to collapse." Friday came. The briefing room smelled of coffee and floor wax. Rows of uniforms filled the seats. I stood at the front with a remote in my hand and the projector humming. I told them this was not a tragedy presentation. It was a logistics one. I walked them through each slide, each step. I showed how early reporting protected jurisdiction, how evidence labeling prevented disputes, how communication between units shortened the case timeline. Then I paused on the final slide. I said, "Everything you see here was built while a child was crying. Procedure doesn't erase pain, but it prevents confusion from making more of it." The room was silent. Then the XO nodded once. It was enough. Afterward, a young sailor approached me. "Ma'am, I have a daughter," he said. I didn't know the system could actually work. "It works when you keep the paperwork alive," I said. "That's what makes the people inside it listen." That night, Maya and I celebrated with takeout burgers. She wore her hair in a new braid that covered the uneven part. She said, "My counselor says I'm allowed to feel proud now." "You are," I said. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Are you proud too?" "Yes," I said, "but not of surviving. I'm proud we kept the story honest." Before bed, I opened the binder one more time. The last page was blank. I wrote only one line. "Leadership means protecting even when shaking." I placed the pen inside and closed it. Outside, the playground lights were bright again. The maintenance team had installed another camera now. 2 red dots watched from opposite corners, crossing sight lines like guardians. The metal plate on the post gleamed as always, unremarkable, steadfast. When I turned off the lamp, the beam from Maya's clay lighthouse caught the edge of the binder. It made the cover glow for a moment, as if the paper itself were reflecting light back into the room. I thought of Captain Hughes's voice saying model. I wondered if she knew that models are built not from perfection, but from the places that cracked first. I lay down, and before sleep found me, I whispered the same promise I had whispered the night I first called security. We keep the record. We keep the light. 3 days after the briefing, a knock on the door woke me before dawn. It wasn't the hesitant kind. It was official, deliberate. I checked the peephole and saw a courier in uniform holding a document pouch. When I signed, the paper inside was heavy with seals. The first page read, United States District Court, Notice of Proceedings. Hughes had warned me this was coming, but seeing the words made it real. The date of the hearing, the courtroom number, the formal case title, United States v. Eleanor Quinn, Lisa Quinn, and Patrick Quinn. It looked like another person's life typed in neat lines. Maya woke to the sound of the envelope tearing. "Is it bad news?" she asked. "No," I said. "It's justice catching up." She frowned, then said, "Justice walks slow." "Yes," I said, "but it knows the way." I called Captain Hughes to confirm receipt. She told me the preliminary hearings would be closed to the public, only essential witnesses allowed. "You'll testify only for chain of custody verification and victim context," she said. "Minimal exposure. We want to protect Maya's anonymity." I thanked her, hung up, and sat staring at the kitchen wall until the kettle screamed. By afternoon, the news had leaked anyway. Someone online had pieced together enough fragments from public records to post, "Family feud on base becomes federal case." The article used old photos of my parents, smiling in front of their church. The caption read, "Beloved community members face accusations." There was no photo of me, just the words Naval Petty Officer in cold print. My hands trembled as I scrolled through comments. Some defended them, others condemned them, all strangers deciding what love and discipline meant. Marisol called the moment she saw my name trending. "Don't engage," she said. "Silence protects you more than any argument." I told her I wasn't planning to answer, but my chest felt like it was shrinking with every headline. She said, "Let the court be the only voice that matters now." That night, I deleted the app from my phone. The world went suddenly quieter, as if someone had turned down a storm. The quiet was almost physical, pressing against my ears. Maya noticed my silence and asked if the bad people were talking again. I said, "They're talking to themselves." She nodded and went back to her drawing. She was working on another lighthouse, taller this time, with 2 beams crossing like swords. 2 days later, I received the court preparation packet. It included witness guidelines, seating charts, and a line that read, "Testimony must remain factual, not emotive." I smiled at the irony. Emotion had built the whole case, but now I was being told to stand still inside it like a diagram. Daniels called that evening to walk me through the procedure. "The judge may ask you to verify visual elements, the sign, the pole, your evidence numbering. Speak slow. Stay inside the moment you recorded, not the one you lived." "Understood," I said. "Stay in the paper, not the pain." He paused, then said softly, "Exactly." After the call, I sat with the binder again. The first pages were already curling at the corners. I flipped through, each photo and note a frozen heartbeat. When I reached the first recording log, I realized it had been only 6 weeks since that day at the playground. 6 weeks, and yet the distance felt geological. Maya came out from her room carrying her clay lighthouse. She said, "Can I take this to court when you go?" "Why?" "So, it remembers what we did." I smiled. "Maybe we'll take a photo of it instead." She accepted that. She's learning how symbols travel safer than bodies. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. The base was silent except for a low hum of a generator somewhere beyond the hangars. I walked through the rooms, touching the edges of furniture, checking locks. The same routine that had once been fear now felt like prayer. On my desk, the letter from Jag lay next to Maya's drawing. I ran my fingers over the paper. The ink had bled slightly where she had pressed too hard with her pencil. It looked like waves against a wall. I opened the window. The air smelled like sea salt and rain. Somewhere across the field, a jet engine started. The sound rose slow, steady, and then broke into the sky. I watched until the lights disappeared. I thought about how engines don't question where they're going. They just follow coordinates until they land again. I whispered to the night. "Tomorrow, we give them coordinates." Morning came sharp and blue. The uniform pressed, shoes shined, binder packed in my tote. Marisol met us at the gate. She hugged Maya quickly, then turned to me. "I'll stay outside the courtroom. You won't see us, but we'll be there." Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood and air conditioning. The flag behind the judge's bench barely moved, as if holding its breath. Daniels sat at one table, calm, organized. Across from him were 3 defense attorneys. I didn't look at them. When my name was called, I stood. The oath felt like an echo of the one I took when I enlisted, same cadence, same gravity. My hand did not shake. I confirmed each piece of evidence. The photos of the wrist, the rule sign, the light post plate, the clip from the small camera, the envelope numbering. My voice stayed even. Every answer began with, "Yes, ma'am," or "Yes, sir." I could feel my pulse, but not my fear. When it ended, the judge thanked me for my clarity. 2 words, but they felt like release. Outside, the sky had turned almost white from the heat. Marisol and Maya were waiting by the car. Maya ran up, holding her lighthouse wrapped in a towel. She said, "You did it." I said, "We did it." We drove home with the windows down, the air loud and clean. I didn't look back at the courthouse. Some places you don't revisit even in your mind. That night I placed the lighthouse on the windowsill. Its small beam, painted by Maya's hand, caught the moonlight perfectly. It looked like it was watching the horizon for anyone trying to come back. And for the first time in months, I slept without waking to check the door. The hearings were supposed to quiet everything. Instead, they changed the air around us. Neighbors waved with careful smiles that ended too soon. Some avoided my eyes entirely. At the commissary, a woman I'd known for years turned her card away like I was contagious. Justice, it turns out, is clean on paper, but messy in the street. Maya didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and refused to let it matter. She hummed when she drew now songs from old cartoons. Her therapist said it was a good sign. Humming meant she was safe enough to fill the air again. The week passed like any other until Wednesday morning. I found the note. It was early, barely 6. I stepped out to collect the mail before the trucks started their runs. The sky was the pale blue that comes before sunrise. When I opened the front door, something white caught against the threshold. A folded sheet of paper. No envelope. The edges were damp from dew. I lifted it carefully, not touching the center. The handwriting was small, all capitals, printed to disguise itself. "We can fix this if you stop." Nothing else. No name. No date. The words were short, but they vibrated through my ribs. I stood still for a long moment, then closed the door behind me and locked it. I slipped on gloves, laid the note flat on the counter, and photographed it from every angle. Then I placed it in a clean plastic sleeve, labeled it EVID05, anonymous threat, and sealed the bag. I checked the locks again, even though I knew I had already. When Maya woke up, I made her pancakes and told her we'd walk to school instead of taking the bus. Routine holds the world together when the edges start to shake. She asked why I was so quiet. I said I was thinking about new paint for the living room. She didn't believe me but didn't press. After dropping her off, I drove straight to the NCIS office. Daniels was there, half a cup of coffee gone cold beside him. When he saw the sleeve, his eyes sharpened. "You wore gloves?" he asked. "Always," I said. He smiled faintly. "You're my favorite kind of witness." He opened a new file, logged the evidence, and called the base forensic tech. Within minutes, 2 specialists appeared, both in nitrile gloves. They placed the note under a light box, photographed it, then sealed it again. Daniels read the message out loud. "We can fix this if you stop." "It's a poor attempt at intimidation. Or desperation," I said. He nodded. "Either way, it's obstruction. You did the right thing bringing it in immediately." He asked if I'd seen anyone near the house recently. I told him about the slow car a few nights ago, but not the plate number. He jotted it down anyway. As I left, he said, "Don't change your schedule. Don't show fear. Let us track it." His words followed me all the way home. Don't show fear. I parked, stepped out, and saw the faint rectangle of dust where the paper had been. The space looked emptier than it should have. I went inside and checked every window latch again. Then I sat at my desk and wrote a full incident report. Date, time, discovery method, and condition of the note. I printed 2 copies, one for NCIS, one for my binder. Then, almost without thinking, I turned to the next blank page and wrote a single sentence. "Fear thrives on silence. Documentation is its natural enemy." That night, Marisol came by with updates from the case coordination meeting. She was halfway through describing the timeline when she noticed the extra evidence bag on my table. Her face tightened. "What's that?" I handed it to her. She read the message and closed her eyes briefly. "This isn't random," she said. "The language fixed this. It's someone close enough to know the case is turning against them." "Lisa," I said before I could stop myself. Marisol didn't answer. She only said, "Let the forensics confirm it. If it's her handwriting, this will move things fast." She placed the note back on the table gently, as if it were fragile glass. "You'll be fine, Brinley," she said. "You already know how to fight with precision." After she left, I sat in the dark for a while. The streetlight outside flickered once, then steadied. I stared at the pattern of its glow against the blinds. For a moment, it looked like the slow sweep of Maya's lighthouse beam. Crossing the room, I whispered, "We're still here," and turned off the light. The next morning, Daniels called again. The forensics lab had fast-tracked the analysis. "No fingerprints," he said, "but there's pen pressure consistent with someone trying to disguise their normal hand. We're running a comparative now." He paused before continuing. "Brinley, if this comes back to Lisa, it won't just reinforce the existing charges, it'll add obstruction. That's federal." I didn't say anything for a few seconds. The word obstruction had a clean, hard edge. It sounded like metal locking into place. Do what you need to do, I said finally. When I hung up, the house felt different, emptier, but not lonely, like air waiting for confirmation. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and looked at the binder again. I realized I had created something far beyond a personal record. It was a map of cause and effect, a living defense against revision. Every entry, every photo, every signature proof that truth could be built line by line. And yet, I knew the hardest part was still ahead, the moment when proof would have to face denial in the same room. Outside, the sky was clear. The metal plate on the lamp still shone. I looked at it through the window and whispered, "You saw her too, didn't you?" The light didn't answer, but I felt steadier for saying it. The report arrived on a Friday afternoon. A brown envelope, standard government stock, edges sharp enough to cut. I almost didn't open it right away. Part of me wanted to leave it on the table like a sealed truth that didn't need to be spoken yet. But I knew better. Evidence only matters when you face it. Inside was a 2-page summary from NCIS Forensic Division. The heading was plain: Handwriting Comparison Report, Case File 23147BG. The first paragraph was all method and jargon. Then the line that mattered. Observed pen pressure, letter spacing, and unique downward stroke of capital W are consistent with known handwriting samples from Lisa Quinn. Match probability is greater than 95%. I exhaled, slow. Not relief, not victory, just the kind of breath that happens when something heavy finally stops moving. The report also noted the brand of ink. Blue gel pen, Parker retractable. Series discontinued in 2019. I remembered seeing one exactly like that in Lisa's old vlog, the one where she was writing captions for her family values posts. She had twirled it between her fingers while talking about forgiveness. Daniels called an hour later. His voice was brisk but edged with satisfaction. "We got her," he said. "Handwriting's hers. That's obstruction, straight and clean. The assistant U.S. attorney is adding the charge. You'll get an updated case brief Monday." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "we make sure she can't spin this as emotion. The note makes it intent." He paused. "You understand what that means, right?" "Yes," I said quietly. "She didn't just hurt Maya. She tried to unwrite what we proved." He sighed. "You've been through every layer of this, Brinley. Most people fall apart halfway. You keep documenting, and you keep calm. That's how you win." After the call, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table. The clock ticked louder than usual. Maya's watercolor set was spread across the counter, brushes drying upright in a mug. The faint smell of paint reminded me of something living, something human in the middle of all this paperwork. I took the clay lighthouse from the shelf and placed it next to the report. They looked strange together, one made of earth and light, the other of paper and ink. Both solid, both proof. That evening, I met Marisol at the Family Advocacy Office. She had already read the forensic summary. "It's a clean match," she said. "They'll issue a warrant for harassment and obstruction. That usually speeds plea negotiations." "I don't want a plea," I said. "I know," she replied. "But the system sometimes prefers closure to clarity. Stay steady, no matter what deal they float." She reached into her folder and pulled out a small stack of handwritten notes. "These are from other cases, families who never got this far. I keep them as reminders." I looked at the pile. So many stories that stopped halfway. "What do you do with them?" I asked. "Archive them," she said. "It's my way of saying their work mattered even if the paper didn't." When she left, the office felt bigger. The walls hummed faintly with the sound of the ventilation system. I stood there a while, listening to that soft, constant hum. It sounded like persistence. The next morning, Maya had art club. She was painting with other kids, their laughter spilling across the community hall like a sound the walls had been waiting for. I stayed near the back, pretending to scroll my phone, just watching her. She called me over when she finished. "Look, Mom, the lighthouse again. This one had 2 beams crossing in an X over the water." I asked her what it meant. She said, "It's a warning light now, so people don't crash where we did." I felt my throat tighten. "That's exactly what lighthouses are for," I said. She grinned. "Then it's working." When we got home, the base legal office had emailed an update. Amendment to indictment filed, count 3, obstruction of justice. Attached was a short note from Captain Hughes. Your documentation from EVID-05 remains central to this charge. The Assistant U.S. Attorney expressed appreciation for your precision. Stay available for re-verification. I reread that last sentence 3 times. Appreciation for your precision. The words felt foreign, but good. For the first time, I realized that every list, every timestamp, every photograph had built not only a defense but a reputation. Precision was its own form of resilience. That night, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea. The air was cool, heavy with salt. The light post across the street stood steady. The numbers on the plate gleamed like quiet witnesses. A breeze rustled the notebook pages beside me. I opened to the last entry and added one more line. Obstruction discovered. The system listens when the evidence speaks louder than the noise. Inside, Maya had fallen asleep with her sketchbook on her chest. Her newest drawing was still wet, the lighthouse beam stretching over the sea, illuminating a small boat that hadn't yet reached shore. I closed the book gently and whispered, "You made it bright enough." Outside, the lamp kept its silent vigil. For the first time, the light didn't feel like a guard. It felt like a companion. The final hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning, gray and still. The sky looked like unpolished metal. No drama, no sun, just a surface that reflected whatever courage you brought to it. I dressed slowly, uniform pressed, ribbons straight, hair tied back. Maya watched from the doorway. She was quiet, holding her sketchbook like a shield. "Will they go to jail?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "But the truth will stand today." She nodded, then handed me a small paper lighthouse she had folded from notebook pages. "For your pocket," she said. I slid it inside my jacket. It rustled when I breathed, like a tiny heartbeat. The courthouse was half full. Most of the seats were empty except for a few officials, the attorneys, and the quiet hum of air conditioning. The judge looked the same as before, calm, clean lines in her posture, no wasted words. When the session began, the prosecutor spoke first. Her tone was simple, almost mathematical. "Your Honor, new evidence confirms that defendant Lisa Quinn attempted to influence ongoing proceedings through written communication with the victim's household. The letter was authenticated through forensic analysis. The government submits this as obstruction under 18 U.S.C. Section 1512. The defense asked to respond. They tried to call it a misunderstanding, an emotional outburst. The judge stopped them with one raised hand. "Intent is established through action," she said, "not explanation." The phrase landed like a bell. I sat still, hands folded. I thought of that morning, the note, the dew on the paper, the way I had refused to touch it barehanded. That small decision now sat in the record as proof. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I stood and said, "Only that I want my daughter to grow up believing truth has structure. You've helped build it today." The judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The record will reflect the witness's statement." And that was it. No theatrics, no shouting, just signatures, dates, and the quiet weight of completion. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the air felt wider. Marisol hugged me hard, then stepped back. "You did it," she said. "No," I said. "The system did what it was supposed to." She smiled. "That's rarer than you think." Maya ran up and grabbed my hand. "Can we go to the pier now?" she asked. We did. The sea was calm, the tide low. She leaned on the railing, wind tangling her hair, the uneven line now grown softer. I watched the water hit the rocks and thought of every time it had done that before, endless, repetitive healing by persistence. "Mom?" she said. "Yes? Does it feel over?" I looked out at the horizon. "It feels right-sized," I said. "The world's big again." She seemed to understand. She whispered, "Good." That evening, Captain Hughes called with the formal results. "Defendants accepted plea on obstruction and aggravated assault," she said. "Sentencing next month. But the plea secures a restraining order. They'll have no contact for 10 years minimum." Her voice held satisfaction but also respect. "Your documentation was textbook. Commands using it for the new victim response protocol. You've changed how we train." When the call ended, I stared at the phone for a long moment. Not from disbelief, but because victory sometimes arrives without ceremony, and you need time to recognize its face. I turned to the binder on the shelf. It looked almost ordinary now, its pages still, no longer multiplying. I ran a finger down the spine. The edge caught the light, faint and silver. Then I picked up Maya's clay lighthouse and set it on top of the binder. The two belonged together, the fragile and the formal, faith and proof. Later, as dusk fell, Maya asked if she could stay up to watch the light sweep across the ceiling one more time. I said yes. We sat in silence, both watching that slow-moving glow trace across the room. "It looks like it's writing something invisible," she said. "Maybe it's signing the day closed," I said. She smiled sleepily. "Then, today's name is done." When she drifted off, I sat for a while longer, listening to the sound of waves far beyond the base fence. I realized the sound was the same as the whisper of paper turning, the same rhythm that had guided every report, every line, every small act of order in chaos. I whispered into the quiet. We made it through the paperwork of pain. Outside, the lamp over the playground stood steady, its numbers shining like coordinates on a map that had finally led us home. The request came by email with a simple subject line. Ethics. Bulletin would like a closing statement. No word count, only a date. I opened a blank document and watched the cursor blink. It pulsed like a small heartbeat in the corner of the screen. For a while I just listened to the bass through the open window. A forklift beeped somewhere behind the hangar. Farther out, a gull scolded the wind for nothing in particular. The world does not wait for your thoughts to settle. It keeps moving and invites you to join when you can. I began with the only sentence that felt honest. We were hurt in a public place, and the public record helped us heal. I let the words sit there without decoration. Then I wrote what came after. I wrote that procedure is not cold when it is used to protect the warmest things. That photographs become blankets when memory is shaking. That the rule sign in the corner of a frame can put a wall around a child. That a string of digits on a light post can be a witness in a case where people try to unremember what they did. I wrote that chain of custody is a promise you make to your future self. You say, I will keep our truth intact, and then you keep it with boring actions. You label. You seal. You sign across tape. You do not argue with strangers online because the court cannot hear you there. You put the phone down and hold a pencil instead. Pencils write calmer stories. I wrote that the system is made of people on ordinary mornings. A clerk who stamps a form straight. A technician who logs a serial number with clear handwriting. An advocate who asks a child if she wants orange soda or apple juice. Small choices that add up to a feeling you can stand on. I wrote that bravery is sometimes just staying inside the moment you recorded. The doctor said, tell me the words you heard. The judge said, confirm the numbers you wrote. The lawyer said, answer only what was asked. It felt like a narrow hallway at first. Later I understood it was a bridge. I wrote that forgiveness and boundaries are not opposite shores. You can place a fence and still wish the people on the other side find their way to a kinder map. You can live without invitations and still hope they learn what the word respect actually means. I wrote that I am not a hero. I am an admin rate who likes lists. I kept a list until it became a map, and then I followed the map across a long, dark field. The engines at the airfield kept time for my breathing. My daughter's drawings provided the landmarks. We did not sprint. We put one line after another until light gathered around the page. When the words slowed down, I saved the document and printed a copy for the binder. The binder felt lighter now. Not empty. Lighter in the right way, like a pack after you take out what you no longer need to carry. Maya came in with paint on her fingers. She asked what I was working on. I told her it was a letter to the people who train other people. She nodded like this made perfect sense. She asked if my letter had a picture. I said not yet. She said then it needs one. She drew a small lighthouse in the bottom corner with a yellow pencil that was almost out of lead. She shaded the beam and added a tiny door. We walked to the community room for the mural dedication. The wall was finished now. Square next to square, a quilt of paint. A chaplain said a few words that were careful and wide. The maintenance chief said the camera coverage had been tested twice and had passed both tests. The children got cupcakes and rainbow napkins. Maya found her square and touched the edge of it like you might touch a book you love at the library before you put it back for the next person. On the way home, we stopped by a small salon just outside the gate. The stylist had quiet eyes and careful hands. She asked Maya what she wanted. Maya looked in the mirror for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "I want to keep it uneven for now. I want it to grow on its own." The stylist nodded, as if she had heard the deepest poem. She cleaned the ends and smoothed the stray pieces. The mirror showed a girl who belonged only to herself. That night we ate noodles again, because tradition is another word for comfort. After dishes, Maya set her clay lighthouse on the window ledge and turned it toward the street. The beam is paint, not light, but it catches what the moon gives and sends it back. You would think it is a trick. I think it is a lesson. I opened the lockbox one last time. The envelopes were all there. Corners slightly worn, tape lines still tight. I checked each label and closed the lid. I wrote a final card for the front. Evidence returned or archived per court order. Household retains copies for personal record. I slid the card under the elastic strap and turned the key. The click sounded like a chapter closing without slamming. Before bed I ran at the waterline, slow and steady. The path glittered with crushed shell. A jet lifted off and the sound pressed into my ribs. I have always loved that sound. It feels like certainty expressed as air. When I turned back, the base lights looked like a necklace laid out on a dark table. I thought of every window where someone was trying to make sense of a small, hard thing. I wished them good paperwork and kind neighbors and one object that could hold their hope. In the morning, I sent the bulletin statement. The ethics editor replied with a simple thank you and a question. Would you add one closing line for junior sailors? I thought about it for a while. Then I wrote this. When it is hard, make it smaller. When it is small, write it down. When it is written, let the right people read it, then breathe. I pressed send and sat very still until the relief arrived. There was a knock at the door around noon. Not official, just the friendly rhythm of a neighbor. Kara stood there with a plate of cookies and a grin that looked like sleep finally found her. Timmy waved from behind her and asked if the lighthouse was still working. Maya shouted yes from the kitchen. We laughed in the doorway because some answers deserved to be loud. Later, when the house was quiet again, I read my bulletin draft one more time for myself. I added a last paragraph that I did not send, because some words are meant to live only in a home. I wrote to my future self. If you ever forget how we did this, look at the lamp by the playground and read its numbers. Remember the way the digits held the place in the video. Remember the first photo, the first label, the first envelope. Remember that the smallest right choice becomes a path when you repeat it. Remember that a child once drew a light and pointed it at the door, and the door looked different forever. I closed the notebook and listened to the room. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. The bass breathed. A small breeze lifted the curtain and set it down. Nothing grand, everything complete. Maya called to me from the other room. She wanted to cut the first slice of a lemon cake we had made from a box mix. I said yes and brought 2 forks. We ate from the pan because plates felt unnecessary. The cake was too sweet, and a little underdone at the center. We laughed and decided this was perfect. As evening settled, the line of light from the street lamp crossed the wall and found the clay lighthouse. The beam met paint and bounced back as a softer glow. I could not see the path it took after that. I did not need to. I knew where it was headed. The door was locked. The windows were latched. The binder was closed. The lighthouse kept watch. The engines in the distance rolled like a long, slow tide. I rested my hand on the table and felt the grain of the wood under my palm. We were home.